Welcome to Smart from the Start. I'm John Hammond and we are talking about education. In this episode we're actually going to be talking about something bewildering, puzzling, you name it, they've got it. Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z. What comes after Generation Z, I really don't know, but the world is waiting anxiously. Panel, it's really good to have you here with us today, and we want to welcome you. And Lyndon, it's good to have you. I've known you for a long time, but what is your current role?
It's a pleasure to be here, John. I'm currently leading a school, a Natalie Christian College in the city of Melbourne, here in Australia.
That's great. And Josh, you are up at Macquarie College near Newcastle.
Yeah, that's right. I'm an English and history teacher.
And you've been teaching for a long time.
Yeah, all of nearly a year.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
But you're a popular teacher and it's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you.
Natalie, you're a primary teacher. You look like a primary teacher. And whereabouts do you teach?
I teach at Nanawading Christian College in Melbourne. Lyndon is the principal there and I'm in the primary school.
Fantastic. And it's really nice to have you, Clinton. Where are you from?
Thank you. I'm from Cairns, up the top of Australia.
And you're what we call a young principal?
Yeah, young teaching principal, yeah.
And you teach full-time and run the school, or you have some time off?
I have 2 days in the office to do the principal work and 3 days in the classroom.
You know, folk, as I look at our group of experts here and I wonder who is Generation X, who is Generation Y, I think we could even go further back in history and say we have a baby boomer. And have you ever wondered where they all come from? I just want you to have a look at this chart on the screen here. And I would ask you, and I would ask our viewers, where do you fit on this chart? It's really very interesting because we start with the seniors. They were those born before 1925, and so they've got to be 83 years or plus. There are not many of them left. And then we come to the builders, and they are the ones who lived as young people during the Depression and the aftermath. Now, sad to say, I'm actually in the last category of the builders, and even though I don't remember much of the Depression, if anything, I was certainly been reminded by my parents as I grew up, don't waste money, be thrifty and work hard, because we had to eat dripping on the bread and all these things that we used to hear, these terrible stories about the Depression. And then we came to the boomers, and the boomers, they were the age of prosperity. After the war, Australia rode on the sheep's back, it progressed. And before you knew it, we had things like lawnmowers and fridges. And to those of you who remember the first car in your family, it probably came when you were a boomer. And all these things came in. But change went on, and as the last of the boomers came through, we came to the Vietnam era, and a lot of things changed. You know, all this is really fascinating, but what we really want to look at is Generation Y. I really found out something interesting with Generation Y. It happened a year or so ago. I was sitting in a train and there were 4 young people sitting in front of me. And I was watching the dynamics that took place between them. There were 2 on the outside and they had phones, and there were 2 on the inside that had phones. Now, a phone, of course, a mobile phone is just something that everybody has these days, and Australia has more mobile phones, I think, than any other country. But 20 years ago, they didn't exist as far as we were concerned. Well, they all had a mobile phone, and they all had them open, flipped open, and they were all texting. And it took me some time to realise that the 2 on the outside were texting each other about the 2 on the inside. Have you got it? You still with me? And the 2 on the inside were texting about the 2 on the outside. The amazing thing about it, they all seem to be good friends, but they are communicating in a way that never ever happened when I was young, and I suspect, panel, it didn't happen when you were young either. I want you to have a look at this chart. It's really quite fascinating. It's where are you? We go right back to the beginning here, and we start with the seniors. Now, the seniors were born before 1925, and they worked very hard, and they were the ones who were our grandparents who suffered during the Depression. And we used to get these stories about working your fingers to the bone and all the rest, and having to eat bread and dripping, and eating rabbits and all these things, potatoes. And then we come to the builders, and Lyndon, I was having a go at you before about being a baby boomer. I have to confess that I'm in the last year of the boomers. They were born between 1926 and 1945. And it was the builders who came after the Depression and saw how Australia and the rest of the world rebuilt itself after the Depression. And after the Depression, however, we come to the baby boomers. And the baby boomers were born from 1946 to 1964. And it was this generation that saw Australia, the Western world saw great prosperity. In Australia, we say we rode on the sheep's back. And all of a sudden, people had cars, and they built their houses. They only built houses with a single garage. You don't find many of those today. But one car, and lo and behold, in Australia in 1956, we got television. It was about that big. It was black and white and very grainy, but we all queued up to watch it. And it was an era of great prosperity. And following the baby boomers, we ended up with the Vietnam War, and along came Generation X. Now, Generation X, they were born from 1965 to 1981. And we've got a couple of Generation X's here who are now the teachers in schools in our country. And they hold a great responsibility, but they started to think differently because it was Generation X that were the first to have the PC. You know what a PC is? Personal computer. Can you remember the mighty, powerful Commodore 64 or the Mac Plus? Almost no memory whatsoever, but we thought they were pretty marvellous. And we also developed a phenomenon in this world called AIDS. And what a dreadful scourge that has been. And now we come to Generation Y. Well, they've been born since 1982 to the year 2000. And a tremendous change has happened. And I just want to ask the panel, as you were growing up, you were frustrated by the older generations before you. This is natural because I know that Generation Y is frustrated with Generation X. Generation X is starting to respect the baby boomers because now they have their own families. But what were some of the frustrations that you felt about the previous generation? Clinton.
Oh, I suppose it's the typical thing, isn't it? You know better than the previous generation. They're just a bunch of old people who don't know what they're talking about, and you know, I've got this new enlightened wisdom.
What about you, Natalie?
I tend to agree with Clinton there. Very much so. Yeah. You know, we would look back and think, oh, they don't know, because the times have changed.
What do you reckon, Josh?
I think it was just a general sense of frustration that the world, from my point of view, made sense, but for some reason they didn't see my world.
And now we come back to our mature friend, the boomers. What frustrations did you feel, Lyndon?
Well, I lived a fairly Spartan life, growing up on a farm, and so there were always things to do. There was no spare time. In the morning, it was a matter of getting up and doing some chores around the place. Evening, similar sort of thing. So always something to do. Yeah. So work ethic was really important.
There you have it in a nutshell. Don't go away. When we come back, we're going to have a very enlivened discussion as to what we're going to do with Generation Y. Can we sort them out, or are they going to sort us out? Just come back. Welcome back to Smart from the Start. This education segment is talking about Generation Y and beyond. And I just wonder whether you are aware of a phenomenon that has occurred in this world, in Western society, over the last 10 years that perhaps we never ever anticipated. You go back 100 years, you go back only 20 years, if a younger generation wanted to know something, they had to go to an older person, a teacher, to get it. And as they say, knowledge is power. But with the advent of the internet, and the internet is absolutely the domain of Generation Y more than any other generation, we now find that they are establishing their values from the internet. They want knowledge. They don't have to go to an older person. They can just go to Google and they get information and knowledge, and they can completely leap past an older generation. Now, panel, this leaping past actually involves leaping past teachers. How do you as teachers manage Generation Y in your day-to-day teaching with them? Joshua.
Yeah, I think that you really have to think about what it is that really engages this generation. And at the heart of it, I think it's their friends and their peers and the people that they spend time with. And I think that when you can combine technology in some way with that, you've got a really powerful means of reaching them.
But when you were young, your peers were important to you. Yeah, your best friend. If you fell out with a friend, Natalie, you were heartbroken probably. But is the impact of peers and the relationship with peers any the more important now we've got to Generation Y? How do you observe this dependency they have on their peers? We've talked about texting.
Well, peers have a lot of pressure on an individual teen. You can see it in the media. There's media influence, yes, but that also influences what they each think is cool or what is in, and they turn to their, teens turn to their friends to see if their friends think it's cool, and if their friends think it's cool, they're more likely to get on board with what is in style, in vogue or in fashion. And sometimes that is contrary to what is good Christian values, really. Yeah. And we need to learn how to engage peers and teaching them good values and how they can deal with life and thinking skills and so on. But yeah, getting them really engaged with their peers is an interesting challenge.
Yeah. Lyndon, you've come up through the ranks as a teacher and a principal, and you've been an education director for many years, and you've taken the step to be a principal again, which takes a bit of courage, and you've had to learn the computer. Are the kids in your school further ahead in computers than you are? How do you keep up with them?
Well, I think pretending to keep up is never going to work. I think you've got to be real when you're dealing with this generation. You've got to be able to say, look, I can't do that. Would you show me? And I think probably one of the really significant issues is that because the young people are relying on one another, the old filter, which generally gave good information and sort of the good from the bad, is no longer there. So probably our major role is to be the judge, give them a hand to make those judgment calls.
I'll go back to Josh. Josh, do you actually hold a piece of chalk in your hand these days?
No, it's I'm actually really blessed at my school to have a data projector in the classroom. So often I don't even have to write on the board. I can just type it on my computer and it'll come up. Oh, if not, I have a whiteboard. So
when you teachers prepare lessons, do you obviously got a curriculum and programs? Do you go to the internet? And I mean, how do you do it to keep up with Generation Y?
You go to the internet, and we obviously know how to filter, and we use it in our classes. It's interactive. Students love walking into class and seeing the data projector on and the interactive whiteboard working, and they are instantly engaged.
Yeah.
I think YouTube is a real blessing to many teachers. I know I'm often just downloading something off YouTube the night before and just thinking that's going to be great for that class tomorrow, and the kids are going to grab that, and some of them may have already seen it and they feel like it's relevant. They feel like, hey, you're talking a language that we understand.
Lyndon, you're in a classroom and you pronounce some fact and you think it is correct. Do your students ever go home and Google it and then come back the next day and say, Mr. Bond, we've got news for you? Or are you so much up with the running that you're aware of these traps?
Well, I was going to say that I'm never wrong, so I don't have that problem. No, no. Yeah, every now and then, they'll say, oh, hang on a minute, I've checked this up, and yeah, the best type of teacher is the one that's ever learning, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
And when we're talking about this issue, I think that, teachers need to be constantly updating, with the new technologies and things like that. I mean, this year I've only got a mobile phone, so I'm still catching up, I suppose.
Look, there's one thing that does concern us as educators. 40 years ago, you'd send a letter home, dear mum and dad. You dare not do this these days because the average home, if you look at it statistically, is going to be a one-teacher, a one-parent home. How do you cope with that? How do you cope with family values with Generation Y when they might not have the wholesome family that we might have grown up with?
Yeah, I think that, well, in the past, I think it's been very sensitive to say, oh, do you have a mum and dad at home, or to mention parents and then to find out that they don't have both at home. But I think that Generation Y is actually, as sad as it may be, in some cases used to that. And so maybe by just asking the child, like, so have you got both parents at home, or do you live with mum, or do you live with dad? And sometimes just actually getting into their lives and talking to them, and then you can know and ring or email or get in contact.
It's probably one of the things that's more important than ever. It's very important for us to know our kids well. In the past we could make assumptions, as you're alluding to, but today we cannot.
Yeah, no, I see your heads nodding with me in agreement. I look at you viewers, and I suspect that there are many people who are identifying with the conversation that we are having. We love children, we work with them. You love them even more. You bore them, and you rear them day by day, and you see them growing, but you see them taking on values that are quite foreign to the rock of ages that we grew up with. And what are we going to do with them? Don't go away, because when we come back, we've got hope to offer for you. And it'll be very interesting just to hear how this panel reacts to life outside of school. Welcome back to Smart from the Start. We've been talking about Generation Y, and I want to just turn to the panel for a minute. Oh no, they're caught up with Generation Y. Look, they're texting each other. Put it away, guys. Very good. Was that YouTube or just a plain text? But criticism abounds about Generation Y. We older people say, why don't they get a decent job instead of changing careers 7 times in their lives? Why don't they get a mortgage? Why don't they move out of home? But they face pressures that we never anticipated, and we just wonder what's going to happen in the future. Do you realise, if you're a churchgoer in the mainstream church, now I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, as the members of this panel are, and we've been told that by the year 2030, wait for it, 90% of our church membership will have been born in the 21st century. Now, I think it would be fair to say that the same thing will apply in whichever church you are attending, because the older generation dies out. Now let's just talk about churches, because churches and schools are pretty closely related in our existence. What do you see in your local congregation or in churches that you visit? Because I visit many churches, not just within our own denomination. What is the impact? What do you see happening to Generation Y? Are the churches catering for them? Tell me.
Oh, not entirely. You might visit a church and in the back row you might see some youth texting each other, just like you mentioned on the train. And they're sitting in church during a sermon and there they are.
Do you want a confession? Somebody got me about a year ago and they said, I saw you texting during church. And I said, well, it was a boring sermon, but listen to me. Here you get Generation Y and they sit through a 45-minute droning sermon that doesn't do anything for them. How are you going to get them to come back to church the next week?
Yeah, I think like Generation Y experiences life in such a different way. I mean, you could be on the computer with your, with your headphones on, listening to music while you're emailing, while you're writing assignment, while you're downloading something off YouTube. You're essentially doing 4 things at once, and that's just an alien concept to members of previous generations. And I think when you go from living your life that way, doing so many multiple things simultaneously, to going to church and, as you said, just sitting and listening to one presenter for up to 45 minutes, it can be a different way of getting information.
Can you expect a young man or woman in Generation Y to stand and sing "Shall We Gather by the River" as the organ goes along, when really what is going through their iPod would probably blow your ears out, because their music is so different? How do you cope with modern music when the majority of the congregation who still set the rules are quite different to Generation Y, who want something different? How do you handle worship style in church?
I think smart churches are responding to that and including Generation Y personnel in planning and in fact including them in leadership positions within their congregations. Those churches are smart.
What do you think of those churches that split the service and they have the oldies at the beginning and then the younger generation come in and they worship their own way? Is that splitting the church or is it uniting the church?
I guess it could go either way. I think that having a broad spectrum in your congregation can teach tolerance, and it can help the younger people to realise, hey, well, there's another way of worshipping, and vice versa. It can help an older generation to say, well, maybe we need to be more accepting of the way people today or younger people today engage with God in a worship format.
You know what I think makes the difference? If a church leader, an older person, likes the kids and enjoys being with them, their battle is halfway there if we don't condemn them. But you know, folks, there is something more to come yet. We've looked at Generation X, we've looked at Generation Y, and it's not around the corner. They are here with us now. Welcome to Generation Z. Generation Z are all those who were born from the year 2001 onwards. Now, I have a little granddaughter. She's Generation Z. Her name is Abby. She's only 18 months old, but she can turn on my computer faster than I can. You know, Natalie, you are teaching Generation Z, and probably it is very difficult for you to see into the future and say, these little children in my little classes here, they are going to face something that is beyond our ken. What are some of the factors that are encroaching upon the world that Generation Z is going to have to deal with?
I think there's so many different environmental issues that are coming up, oil and different resources that are drying up. They'll be facing all of those issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Global warming, drought in Australia, it's quite common to see it still in the news.
All the experts tell us, that the world is warming up very slowly, and then they revise it every year or so and say it's warming up faster and faster. This is going to have huge consequences. It's going to place a lot of pressure upon Generation Z, and they are the ones who in another 30 years will be tucking us into our beds and giving us the hot water bottles in the old people's homes, and they will be running the world, and they'll be running our schools, they'll be running our churches. And what is going to happen to them?
John, in the meantime, they just long for the sorts of things that you and I really loved when we were kids. And
What are
was a
those
chance,
values?
That's a chance to sit on Granddad's knee and have a story read to them, to have a rumble, on the lounge room floor. Those sorts of things are still important.
You know, we believe that Jesus Christ is coming again soon. We love our children. We love Generation Y. They are so refreshing. We love Generation Z. We don't know what is going to face them, but we are not fearful. We have a God who loves us more than you could possibly ever understand. He is besotted with us, and He is coming again. His timing is great. He wants to have as many people live with Him in heaven, and I just look forward to that. The panel looks forward to it. You have dedicated your lives to teaching, and I just say to our viewers, be of good courage. God loves you, and Jesus is coming again.